A billionaire almost lost his entire empire, until a 6-year-old housekeeper's daughter exposed the woman destroying it. The Collins mansion always seemed to breathe luxury, polished marble floors, sweeping staircases, and rooms so spacious that even sound hesitated to echo. But on that particular morning, beneath all the surface shine, something tense and uneasy hung in the air like an unspoken warning. 6-year-old Lily had woken earlier than usual, rubbing her sleepy blue eyes as she slipped out of the small guest room where her mother let her rest while working. Her red t-shirt was slightly wrinkled, her denim skirt crooked from sleep, but her mind was clear with a simple goal: she wanted to help her mother. She remembered Maria mentioning that she had forgotten her cleaning cart near the east hallway, and Lily, wanting to surprise her, tiptoed across the carpeted floor, keeping her steps soft and quick. The hallway stretched long and quiet, lit only by slim beams of early sunlight filtering through tall windows. Lily hugged her arms to herself, partly from the chill and partly from the eerie stillness of the enormous house. As she turned a corner, she suddenly stopped. Voices drifted from the sitting room ahead, sharp, fast, and edged with anger. Lily pressed herself against the wall, curious but nervous, willing her breathing to stay quiet. She recognized one of the voices instantly. It was Mrs. Lauren, the mistress of the house, whose perfect blonde curls and icy smile always made Lily shrink back. Lauren never liked children, especially not the housekeeper's daughter. But today her voice wasn't just cold, it was furious. "If you want this deal done, you need to move faster," Lauren snapped, her tone slicing the air like glass. "He cannot find out until it's too late." A second voice answered, lower but trembling slightly, the voice of a man Lily had never heard before. "It's risky," he said. "Selling off his shares behind his back, it's necessary," Lauren cut in harshly. "Once the transfer is complete, the money goes to me. After that, we disappear. Do you understand? Evan works too much and thinks too much. He'll never even notice until the company is gone." Lily's heart pounded so violently that she felt it in her throat. She didn't understand every word, but the meaning was clear even to a child: Mrs. Lauren was doing something very, very wrong. Worse, she was planning to hurt Mr. Evan, the kind man who sometimes said hello to Lily when he saw her, the man who always thanked Maria after a long day. Lily stepped backward, terrified, but her foot bumped a metal bucket someone had left in the hall. It tipped slightly and made a small, hollow clatter. Lauren fell silent. The air thickened. Lily froze like a trapped rabbit. She heard footsteps approaching the doorway of the sitting room, slow and suspicious. Panic took over, and Lily spun around and ran as fast as her small legs could carry her, her breath coming out in sharp little gasps. Her feet slapped against the floor, and she darted into the connecting corridor, ducking behind a large decorative vase just in time. Lauren's shadow stretched across the wall as she stepped into the hallway, scanning the area with narrowed eyes. "Hello." Lauren called sharply, but not with concern, with threat. "Is someone there?" Lily pressed her fists against her mouth to keep from making a sound. After a tense moment, Lauren muttered something under her breath and returned to the sitting room. Only when her footsteps faded did Lily finally dare to breathe again. She crawled out from her hiding spot and hurried toward the service rooms, her hands trembling uncontrollably. She didn't know exactly what she had heard, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty: whatever Mrs. Lauren was doing, it was dangerous, and Mr. Evan must never find out the wrong way. But the thought of telling anyone made her stomach twist with fear. She was just a little girl. Who would believe her over the beautiful, powerful lady of the house? Tears threatened to spill, but she wiped them quickly. She hadn't meant to hear anything. She hadn't wanted to. But now the truth was lodged inside her small heart like a thorn, and she had no idea what to do with it. All she knew was that something terrible was happening in this house, and she had accidentally become its only witness. Maria noticed something was wrong the moment she saw her daughter sitting at the tiny kitchen table in the servants' wing, her little shoulders hunched and her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her red t-shirt. Normally, Lily talked non-stop after a morning at the mansion, about shiny railings, the garden fountain, or the funny patterns she found on the carpets, but today she stared at the plate in front of her without touching a single bite. Her small denim skirt brushed against her knees as she swung her legs anxiously under the chair. Maria placed a gentle hand on her daughter's back, her voice soft with concern as she asked what had happened. Lily only shook her head at first, her breath uneven, as though she were trying to hold something heavy inside her fragile chest. When Maria crouched to meet her eyes, she realized the problem was far greater than simple childish fear. Lily's bright blue eyes, usually filled with light and imagination, looked clouded and haunted. The girl opened her mouth, closed it, then finally whispered that she had heard something bad, very bad, her voice trembling so much that Maria felt panic bloom in her heart. She tried to coax out the details gently, reassuring Lily that she wasn't in trouble, that she could tell Mama anything. But Lily glanced toward the hallway as if expecting someone to appear, and her little fingers gripped Maria's sleeve with desperate strength. Eventually, haltingly, she explained she had overheard Mrs. Lauren talking to a strange man. She repeated the words she remembered, something about selling the company, about disappearing with the money, about making sure Mr. Evan never discovered the truth. With each piece of the story, Maria felt her breath catch. The child described Lauren's voice, angry, sharp, frightening, and how she had tried to run but accidentally made a noise. Even now, recounting it, Lily trembled, remembering the sound of the bucket and the terrifying moment when Lauren stepped toward the hallway, calling out as though hunting someone. Maria listened in complete silence, feeling a slow dread seep through her bones. She had worked in many wealthy households over the years, but the Collins mansion had always seemed safe. She respected Evan deeply, admired his discipline and kindness, and never imagined anything like betrayal could stain his home. The idea that his own wife might be secretly sabotaging him felt unreal, like the plot of a crime drama rather than something her daughter would stumble into by accident. But Lily was not the type to invent stories, and the raw fear in her voice was not something a child could fake. Maria wrapped her arms around her daughter, holding her close as Lily buried her face in her mother's shoulder. She felt the child's small heart hammering wildly and wished desperately she could protect her from whatever danger she had inadvertently uncovered. Maria repeated softly that everything would be all right, but even she didn't fully believe the words. If what Lily heard was true, they were entangled in something far bigger than a family argument. The rest of the day passed with a tension that neither of them could shake. While Maria went about her cleaning tasks, she noticed Lauren's sharp heels clicking more aggressively than usual on the marble floors, noticed her abrupt, clipped commands, noticed the nervous-looking man who had come by earlier returning briefly to hand her a folder before disappearing again. Maria kept Lily close, not letting her wander even a few steps away, and she avoided any rooms Lauren entered. That evening, as they returned to their small apartment, Maria brewed tea for herself, her hands shaking so badly she nearly spilled the water. She couldn't tell anyone, not without proof, not without risking her job, her safety, and Lily's safety. Worse, she feared that if Lauren realized Lily had overheard her, the woman was capable of anything. Maria had seen enough coldness in those icy blue eyes to know she was not someone who forgave mistakes. Meanwhile, Lily sat curled on the couch clutching her stuffed bunny, her mind replaying the morning over and over. She wondered why Mrs. Lauren wanted to hurt Mr. Evan when he was always kind and worked so hard. She wondered why grown-ups chose to do such terrible things. Above all, she wondered whether she should tell someone, and if she did, whether the truth would even matter coming from a little girl. Maria sat beside her and stroked her hair, trying to soothe her, but Lily's voice came out in a whisper that cracked from fear. "Mommy, will she hurt me if she finds out I hurt her?" The question broke Maria's heart. She pulled Lily close and promised she wouldn't let anyone touch her. But inside, Maria was torn. She knew the only person who needed to hear the truth was Evan himself, but how could she let her 6-year-old daughter step into something so dangerous? That night, as Lily finally fell asleep in her mother's arms, Maria stared at the ceiling, wrestling with the impossible choice. Stay silent and watch an innocent man lose everything, or speak up and risk being crushed by the power of a woman like Lauren. She didn't have answers yet. But one thing was certain, this secret was far too big for a child to carry, and sooner or later, truth would demand to be heard. Evan returned home earlier than usual the following day, something that hadn't happened in months. His employees had noticed the way he had stared at the reports that morning, the ones showing abnormal financial activity, strange transfers, and missing documentation. All of it hinted at betrayal, yet he refused to believe anyone inside his circle would dare manipulate him so directly. By late afternoon, the faint beginnings of a headache throbbed behind his eyes as he finally stepped into the mansion, loosening his tie while moving through the quiet halls. The house smelled of polished wood and fresh linen as always, yet today there was an unshakable heaviness to the air, as if the walls themselves sensed something wrong. He headed toward the living room, running through numbers and possibilities in his mind, but he stopped when he saw a tiny figure standing near the edge of the carpet. Lily was gripping the hem of her denim skirt, shifting uneasily from foot to foot. The moment she noticed him enter, she froze like a startled deer, her blue eyes wide and filled with an emotion far too heavy for someone her age. Evan softened his expression instantly, confusion knitting his brow. He rarely interacted with her for more than a polite greeting, yet something about her posture tugged at him. He crouched down so their eyes met on the same level, studying her face carefully. "Hello, Lily," he said quietly, letting his voice soften, as if speaking to a frightened bird. "Did something happen?" She opened her mouth, closed it, then looked away as if ashamed. Her fingers twisted the fabric of her red shirt, pulling it tighter and tighter. Evan felt a slow sense of alarm rise in him. Children didn't act like this unless something weighed on them deeply. He reached out gently, not touching her, but offering the steady presence of someone who would listen if she wanted to speak. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Saw who's doing it, but I'm afraid to say." Her words trembled in the air. Evan blinked with surprise, not immediately understanding. "Doing what?" he asked carefully, but Lily shook her head, panic flashing through her eyes. She raised her hands slightly as if to protect herself, her breath coming quicker. It was the raw, pure fear of a child who believed saying the truth would invite danger. Evan felt the pieces clicking into place, his wife's recent secrecy, the missing documents, the strange phone calls she kept stepping outside to take, all colliding with the image of this trembling 6-year-old before him. He lowered his voice even more. "Lily, you're safe here. No one will hurt you. You can tell me." She looked at him again, this time with a desperate kind of trust forming, as if she had been waiting for someone who would not dismiss her words. Her chin quivered, and tears gathered in her eyes as she whispered everything, the voices she overheard, the man in the suit, Lauren talking about selling his shares, the plan to take the money and disappear, the way she tried to run, the bucket she knocked over, and how Lauren had nearly caught her. As Lily spoke, Evan felt his blood run cold. Each detail pierced him deeper than the last. He listened without interrupting, holding himself completely still because he knew a single wrong reaction might frighten her into silence. When she finished, she wrapped her arms around her stomach as if holding in the fear that still threatened to break out of her. For a long moment, Evan said nothing. Not because he doubted her, but because the truth was hitting him like a tidal wave. His wife, the woman who stood beside him in interviews, who attended charity galas, who played the role of loyal spouse so convincingly, was planning to dismantle everything he built. And no one had discovered it. No one, except a child too small to even reach the mansion doorknobs. He finally exhaled slowly. His voice, when it came, was steady but thick with emotion. "Lily, thank you for telling me." She stared at him, startled by the sincerity in his tone. "You're very brave," he added. "What you did, it took courage. A lot of adults would have stayed silent." Her lower lip trembled, and suddenly the fear she had held back broke loose. Tears rolled down her cheeks, and she let out a small sob, covering her face with her tiny hands. Evan didn't hesitate. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, not forceful, not overwhelming, just steady, offering comfort she desperately needed. Lily leaned forward and cried quietly into the fabric of his suit jacket, her body shaking with relief and anxiety. He stayed like that with her for several minutes, letting her cry until her breathing steadied. When she finally pulled back, wiping her face with the back of her hand, she whispered, "Please, don't tell her I said anything." A fierce protective instinct ignited within Evan, something he hadn't felt since he lost his younger sister as a teenager. He looked Lily straight in the eyes and said with solemn certainty, "I won't let anything happen to you. I promise." The words were simple, but something in her expression shifted, a small spark of trust shimmered beneath the fear. For the first time since that morning, she felt like someone powerful had stepped between her and the danger she couldn't name. Evan stood slowly, his emotions tangled, betrayal, fury, heartbreak, but above all, clarity. He now understood the strange financial patterns, the missing accounts, the secrecy Lauren cloaked herself in. And he owed all of that knowledge not to his analysts, not to his lawyers, but to a little girl with too much courage for her age. As Lily sniffled quietly, still clinging to the edge of her shirt, Evan looked toward the upstairs hallway where Lauren often paced during her phone calls. He knew that his world had just shifted forever. And it all began with a whisper from the one person no one had thought to listen to. Evan didn't sleep that night. He sat alone in his private study, a dim lamp casting a narrow circle of light across stacks of documents he had pulled from his encrypted files. The mansion was silent except for the faint ticking of the antique clock on the wall, but inside his mind everything roared. Betrayal, disbelief, anger, and a cold, sharp focus churned together as he cross-referenced transactions, timestamps, and signatures. The more he dug, the clearer the truth became. Lauren had been siphoning funds through shell accounts for months, forging approvals, and using confidential access she should never have had. The scale of the manipulation hit him like a blow. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't emotional. It was premeditated, calculated, orchestrated. And if Lily hadn't overheard that conversation, he might never have uncovered the scheme until it was too late to save his company. By 3 a.m, Evan straightened abruptly from his desk, his spine aching from hours of stillness. The gentle, trusting sobs of that terrified little girl echoed in his mind. Lily had spoken the truth with fear trembling in her voice, unaware of how devastating her words would be, or how vital. The image of her blue eyes filled with panic tightened something deep inside him. She shouldn't have been dragged into this. She shouldn't have heard any of it. And yet she had been the only one brave enough to reveal what adults with full access to the truth had failed to notice. When dawn finally broke, Evan made a decision. He called his legal team, his cybersecurity division, and 2 board members he trusted with his life. His voice was calm and cold as he explained that he suspected internal sabotage. He didn't mention names. Not yet. He didn't mention Lily either, determined to protect her identity at all costs. Instead, he described suspicious documents and unauthorized transfers that required immediate investigation. Each person on the call reacted with alarm, but beneath their voices Evan sensed something else, embarrassment that none of them had detected the betrayal sooner. He didn't blame them. Lauren had always been meticulous in portraying herself as the perfect partner, smart and supportive. She had played the role so convincingly that even he had failed to see the cracks. By noon, a private investigative team was already following digital trails, tracking shell companies, and freezing accounts. Evan moved through the mansion with a tension that made the staff step out of his way silently. He wasn't angry at them, but he carried the weight of someone who had seen the ground beneath him split open. When he approached the dining room, he saw Lauren sitting at the table sipping coffee, flipping casually through a glossy magazine as though the world around her were perfectly calm. She looked up, her expression bright and artificial. "You're home early again," she said lightly. "Is everything all right at work?" Evan studied her for a long moment. Every instinct urged him to confront her, to throw accusations onto the table and watch her mask crack. But Lily's frightened whisper rang in his ears, "Please, don't tell her I said anything." He kept his voice neutral, controlled. "Everything's fine," he said. "Just a few technical issues that need sorting out." Lauren's smile twitched, not quite reaching her eyes. She was good at hiding things, but not good enough to fool a man who finally knew the truth. Evan turned away before she could read his expression, heading upstairs to the quiet of the guest wing. He hesitated outside the small room where Lily usually stayed when Maria worked late. He could see the faint outline of children's drawings taped to the inside of the door. A sun. A house. A stick figure with dark hair he realized might be him. The innocence in those drawings cut him deeper than any forged document ever could. Later that afternoon, Maria arrived with Lily. The moment the girl stepped into the foyer and saw Evan standing there, her shoulders tensed. But when he offered a small, gentle nod, a promise without words that she wasn't in trouble, she relaxed enough to enter the room. Maria apologized for bringing her, explaining that her sitter had cancelled, but Evan shook his head. He assured her it was no inconvenience. In truth, he wanted to see both of them, to ensure they were safe. While Maria went to handle her tasks, Evan invited Lily into his office, leaving the door open to ease her fear. She hovered near the threshold at first, her fingers nervously tracing patterns on her skirt. Evan spoke softly, asking how she was feeling, whether she had slept, whether she had been scared. Lily answered in shy whispers, but he noticed she was less tense than yesterday. He showed her a small box of colored pencils he had placed on his desk and asked if she wanted to draw while he worked. Her face brightened slightly, and she nodded, clutching the pencils as if they were treasure. The hours passed in a strange but peaceful rhythm. He reviewed documents, and she drew quietly beside him. Several times he caught her glancing up at him, gauging whether he was angry, worried, or upset. Each time he offered a reassuring half-smile. She deserved to feel safe. When Maria returned to collect her daughter, Evan walked them both to the door. Before leaving, Lily turned back, hesitating. Her small voice reached him like a fragile thread. "Are you mad at me?" she asked. It took him a moment to respond, because the question hit him unexpectedly hard. He crouched down again so he could look her directly in the eyes. "Mad at you?" he repeated gently. "No, Lily. I'm grateful to you. You helped me. You were very brave." Her eyes filled with relief, and she nodded shyly before slipping her hand into her mother's. Evan watched them leave, feeling something shift inside him. He wasn't sure what to call it yet, a protective instinct, a sense of responsibility, or something deeper, but he knew one thing with absolute clarity: he would not let Lauren, or anyone else, hurt this child or her mother. Not ever. As the door closed behind them, he straightened and exhaled slowly, his jaw set with renewed determination. The truth had come to him from the smallest voice in the mansion, and now it was his turn to act. The storm Lauren had created was about to be faced head-on, and Evan was no longer walking into it blindly. Evan woke the next morning with a clarity he hadn't felt in days. The storm of emotions that had churned inside him, shock, rage, disbelief, crystallized into a cold, focused determination. His legal team had already sent him the first batch of findings, and they confirmed everything Lily had overheard. Lauren had authorized unauthorized wire transfers, created offshore accounts, and coordinated meetings with a private investment group that planned to dismantle parts of his company and absorb the rest. She had been preparing her exit for months, using his trust as cover while she quietly unstitched the fabric of his life. He spent the early hours pacing the length of his office, reviewing files, emails, and signatures that bore Lauren's forged approval. He remembered the nights she told him she was visiting friends, the early morning phone calls she claimed were about charity events, the coldness that had crept into their marriage long before he recognized it. But beneath all that bitterness lay something else entirely: gratitude. Not for the betrayal, but for the tiny voice that exposed it. Without Lily, he would have been blindsided. Without her, everything he built might have disappeared into the hands of strangers who saw his company only as a source of profit, not as the legacy he had poured decades of his life into. Later that morning, he called a confidential meeting with his board of directors. There was no raised voice, no emotional panic, only a hard, methodical breakdown of what he had discovered. The directors listened in stunned silence as he presented evidence, transaction logs, and intercepted communications. Some stared at the table, unable to believe the betrayal. Others exchanged grim looks, already calculating the legal implications. When Evan finally named Lauren as the orchestrator, the room fell so silent it was as if the building itself was holding its breath. He made one thing clear: this investigation would remain discreet until the legal team advised otherwise. He would not give Lauren the chance to destroy anything else. As the board members dispersed, each looking shaken, Evan stayed behind, staring out the window at the buzzing city below. For the first time in years, he felt the isolation of being a leader, the realization that no matter how many people surrounded him professionally, he had walked blindly into danger because he trusted the wrong person. But the smallest, most fragile person in his orbit had been the one to protect him. That irony weighed heavily on his mind. That afternoon, he drove to Maria and Lily's apartment building. He didn't announce himself ahead of time, afraid that Maria might decline out of modesty. He climbed the narrow stairs, hearing faint children's music coming from the hallway, and knocked softly on their door. Maria opened it with a startled expression, smoothing her apron as if embarrassed by his presence. The apartment was small but clean, filled with the scent of freshly made soup. Lily peeked out from behind her mother, her face still carrying traces of the fear she hadn't fully shaken. Evan stepped inside, carrying a simple cardboard box. He placed it gently on the kitchen table and opened the lid. Inside was a stack of brand new books, a large drawing pad, and a full set of professional coloring pencils, the same kind artists used. Lily's eyes widened, her breath catching in awe. She reached out with hesitant fingers, touching the top pencil as though afraid it might disappear. Maria, emotional and confused, asked why he brought gifts, insisting she couldn't accept such things. Evan assured her quietly that it wasn't charity or pity, it was gratitude. He explained, without revealing any confidential details, that Lily's honesty had helped protect something very important to him. Maria listened, tears gathering in her eyes as he spoke, overwhelmed by the idea that her little girl had changed the course of a billionaire's life. Lily stood by his side, gripping her mother's sleeve, until she finally looked up at him and whispered, "Are you still safe?" The question struck him deeper than he expected. He knelt so he could look her directly in the eyes and told her that yes, he was safe because of her. She let out a small breath of relief and stepped closer, leaning into him as though she had carried that worry for far too long. Over dinner, which Maria shyly offered and Evan gratefully accepted, the atmosphere grew warmer. Lily sat next to him, showing him the drawings she made with the new pencils. He watched her with a quiet tenderness that surprised even himself. She wasn't just a child who had helped him, she was becoming someone he felt deeply responsible for. Someone he wanted to protect not only from Lauren, but from every shadow that might cross her path. After dinner, when he stood to leave, Lily followed him to the door. She tugged gently on his sleeve, her blue eyes earnest and searching. "Are you coming back?" she asked softly, as though terrified he might disappear now that the danger had passed. He didn't hesitate. "Yes, Lily," he said. "I'll come back." Her face lit with a tiny smile, one of the first real ones he had seen from her. Maria watched silently from behind, moved by how naturally Lily reached for him and how naturally he responded. As Evan walked down the hallway toward the stairs, he realized something with startling clarity: he wasn't visiting them out of obligation anymore. He was visiting because it grounded him, because it mattered, because this small, frightened child had become the anchor he didn't know he needed. That night, as he drove home, the mansion felt further away than ever, like an empty shell rather than a home. And for the first time in his life, he wondered whether family wasn't defined by wealth or marriage, but by the rare people who stood by you when no one else dared to speak the truth. Evan spent the next several days navigating a labyrinth of legal maneuvers and quiet investigations, all while keeping an eye on the one person who had become unexpectedly important to him. The board continued to comb through financial records, the cybersecurity team traced digital footprints, and lawyers prepared injunctions and emergency filings, but despite the chaos swirling around his company, Evan found himself returning again and again to Maria and Lily's modest apartment. Each visit grounded him, reminding him of the purity and honesty that still existed in a world that had become polluted with deception and greed. During one such evening, he arrived at their apartment straight from the office, his shoulders heavy from a day full of meetings, accusations, and paperwork. He knocked, and Lily opened the door almost immediately, her small face lighting up with cautious relief. She had been expecting him, that much was clear. She stepped aside, allowing him in, and he noticed something he hadn't before. She smiled differently in the presence of safety, not broad or flamboyant, but small, shy, and warm enough to reach her eyes. Maria was in the kitchen preparing dinner, and the smell of something comforting filled the air: garlic, herbs, warm bread. Evan offered to help, though he knew he would be more of an inconvenience in the cramped kitchen. Maria laughed nervously, waving him off with a gesture that suggested she was still not entirely accustomed to the idea of a billionaire standing in her home. Lily sat him down at their tiny dining table, proudly presenting the newest drawing she had made with the colored pencils he had given her. He studied the drawing with quiet attention. It showed three figures: a tall man in a blue suit, a woman with long hair, and a small child standing between them holding both their hands. The lines were shaky and uneven, but the message behind it was unmistakably clear. Evan felt something warm coil through his chest, a painful, tender awareness that he was becoming a part of their lives in a way he hadn't expected. He wasn't sure whether he had been searching for something to fill the emptiness in his life, but Lily seemed to sense the void instinctively, stepping into it without hesitation. After dinner, the three of them sat together in the living room. Lily nestled beside him with a storybook, though she was far more interested in describing the pictures than reading the words. Evan listened to her chatter, watching the way she animated the characters with her tiny hands. Maria cleaned quietly in the background, glancing up occasionally with soft gratitude in her eyes, as if she couldn't quite believe that someone of his status could be gentle with her daughter. Later, when Lily grew tired and her voice became softer, she climbed onto the couch beside him, eventually resting her head on his arm. Evan froze for a moment, shocked by the unexpected intimacy. He wasn't accustomed to being leaned on. Even in his marriage, affection had been measured and distant. But Lily held no such reservations. She trusted him fully, instinctively, as children trust those who have protected them. Slowly, carefully, he shifted his arm to support her better, allowing her to relax completely. Maria saw this and paused in the doorway, her eyes softening with a mix of gratitude and something else, something unspoken. She whispered that she would put Lily to bed, but before she could lift the girl, Lily sleepily protested, insisting she was fine right where she was. Evan felt a strange twist in his chest, a sense of responsibility and tenderness blooming all at once. Maria quietly backed away, allowing the child to remain. When Lily finally drifted off to sleep, Evan lifted her gently, surprised by how light she was, how fragile. He carried her to her small bedroom, laying her down carefully and tucking the blanket around her shoulders. She mumbled something in her sleep, a soft, indistinct word that sounded suspiciously like his name. He stood there for a moment, watching the rise and fall of her small chest, and felt a sense of peace settle over him, one he hadn't experienced in years. Back in the living room, Maria waited with a cup of tea. She thanked him again for everything he had done, her voice trembling slightly, as though she feared she might say too much. Evan shook his head gently. He told her that if anyone should be thanked, it was Lily. Her honesty had saved a company and a man who had been blind to the danger in his own home. Maria's eyes grew glossy, and she lowered her gaze, clearly overwhelmed. They talked quietly for a while, about Lily, about Maria's fears, about the uncertain future. Evan listened closely, realizing how strong Maria was despite the struggles she carried alone. She spoke about raising a child without support, about working long shifts just to keep a roof over their heads, and how she feared every day that something might happen to Lily. Evan felt guilt settle in his stomach. He had lived in luxury while people like Maria lived in fear, and he had never truly seen it until now. Before he left, Maria hesitated, then asked him softly if everything at his company would be all right. Evan assured her that he was handling it, though his expression betrayed how much weight he carried. She reached out then, a small, instinctive gesture, and placed her hand on his arm in silent support. He was taken aback, not by the touch itself, but by the emotion behind it, concern, sincerity, shared vulnerability. It had been years since anyone touched him with genuine care rather than expectation. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. There was no need. As he stepped out into the evening air, he felt lighter than he had in days. He looked back at the small apartment, its windows glowing warmly against the darkening sky, and felt a strange ache, a longing to remain, to stay in that warmth, to belong to something real for the first time in years. The mansion felt colder when he returned home. Larger. Emptier. But he wasn't alone anymore, not truly. A little girl with bright blue eyes and a brave heart had unknowingly given him something priceless, a reason to fight harder, not just for his company, but for the fragile happiness he had stumbled upon in the small apartment across town. He went to sleep with one clear thought: he would do whatever it took to protect them. Not just from Lauren, but from every shadow that tried to touch their lives. The day of the court hearing arrived with a heaviness that had been building for weeks. Lauren had finally been served with the official accusations: fraud, unauthorized transfers, breach of fiduciary duty, and attempted corporate sabotage. The legal team assembled an airtight case, every piece of evidence aligned in a devastating sequence that left no room for denial. Yet Evan felt no triumph, only an exhausted ache that sat beneath his ribs like something half-healed. He stood outside the courthouse in a tailored navy suit that did little to hide the strain in his face. His normally sharp posture sagged slightly, as if he were carrying a burden larger than the sleek portfolio in his hand. He was not alone. He had not asked Maria or Lily to come. In fact, he had gently suggested they stay home, but when he turned toward the courthouse entrance and saw Maria standing a few steps away, holding Lily's hand, he felt something in him loosen. Lily wore a simple red sweater and her favorite denim skirt, her blonde hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She looked small but resolute, like a child who knew she had already survived something much scarier than a courthouse. When she met Evan's eyes, she let go of her mother's hand and walked straight to him, her little footsteps echoing softly on the stone walkway. She stopped in front of him and reached up, touching the sleeve of his suit. "Are you scared?" she asked in a voice so gentle he almost missed it. Evan crouched to her level, shaking his head with a small, tired smile. "Not scared," he said quietly. "Just ready for it to be over." Lily nodded solemnly, as if she understood the weight of endings and beginnings. She wrapped her arms around his neck in a brief, tight hug, and when she let go, he felt steadier than before. Inside the courtroom, Lauren sat with her attorneys, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her expression composed but strained beneath layers of practiced elegance. She hadn't expected Evan to uncover everything so quickly, and the resentment in her eyes simmered hot enough to scorch stone. When she saw Evan enter with Maria and Lily seated quietly in the back, something flickered across her face, a mix of shock and fury. She hadn't known that the little girl had been the one to expose her secret. The proceedings began, and the atmosphere grew tense. Lawyers presented documents, traced financial trails, displayed email exchanges, and played recorded phone calls. Each piece of evidence chipped away at Lauren's facade until the polished exterior she clung to began to fracture. She tried to speak, first indignantly, then tearfully, then aggressively, but every word was met with contradictions, timestamps, and signatures she couldn't refute. At one point, her attorney attempted a desperate strategy, implying that some of the key information must have come from unreliable sources within the household staff. Evan stiffened. Maria, seated beside Lily, paled visibly. And then Lauren said the worst possible thing, loud enough for the court to hear. A 6-year-old? You're believing a 6-year-old? Children lie all the time. The room shifted. Evan rose slowly, controlled, calm, but his voice carried a cold precision that made even the judge lean forward. She didn't lie, he said. She told me the truth when no one else dared to. And she is the only reason my company still exists. Lauren's lips parted in disbelief, her eyes flicking to Lily in the back row. But what she saw there was not fear, it was the steady gaze of a child who had already faced her once and lived to tell the truth. Lauren faltered, her argument shattered. The judge reprimanded her sharply, noting that attacking a child to defend herself only further undermined her credibility. The rest of the trial felt like the inevitable unraveling of a poorly woven web. By the time the session ended, the court had ruled in Evan's favor, Lauren's access to company assets was revoked, her personal accounts were frozen pending further investigation, and she would be required to comply with an extended inquiry into her actions. She tried to stand tall as she exited, but her confident stride had wilted into something brittle and desperate. Outside, the sky was beginning to darken. Lily tugged gently on Evan's sleeve when he stepped out of the courthouse. Her blue eyes were full of cautious hope. "Is it over?" she asked. Evan looked down at her, the tension in his chest finally loosening. "Yes," he said. "It's over." Maria exhaled shakily, relief overwhelming her features. She placed a hand on Lily's shoulder and thanked Evan quietly for standing up for her daughter in front of the entire court. But Evan shook his head. "I wasn't defending her," he said softly. "She didn't need defending. She was the only person in that room who told the truth from the beginning. All I did was finally listen." Lily stepped closer, slipping her small hand into his. Evan squeezed it gently, feeling the fragile strength in her tiny fingers. The weight of the past weeks, the betrayal, the fear, the uncertainty, seemed to dissolve in the warmth of that simple touch. As they walked toward the car together, the world around them felt strangely quiet. Not empty, but peaceful, as if life itself had paused to acknowledge a turning point. Evan glanced down at Lily, then at Maria walking silently beside them, and for the first time since the nightmare began, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years, the sense that his life was no longer defined by what he had lost, but by what he had unexpectedly gained. And somewhere deep inside him, a new truth settled firmly into place: he would do everything in his power to protect this little girl and the mother who raised her with more courage than most people possessed. This wasn't obligation anymore. It was something far more powerful. It was purpose. Evan didn't realize how much of his life had been spent in silence until the noise finally stopped. After the court ruling, after the press quieted down, after the endless meetings and legal papers were signed, the world around him felt strangely gentle. For the first time in months, he could breathe without tension curling tight in his chest. Yet the place where he expected relief to settle felt empty instead, until the soft, familiar voice of a child filled it again. A week after the trial, Evan walked into the small apartment building where Maria and Lily lived, carrying a grocery bag in one hand and a stack of paperwork in the other. He hadn't been invited. He didn't need to be. By now, Maria knew that when he showed up, it was never out of obligation but because something inside him drew him back to them. When he knocked, Lily was the one who opened the door. The moment she saw him, her whole face transformed, lighting up with a joy so pure it pulled him into a quiet, unexpected warmth. She threw her arms around his waist, surprising him with the force of her hug. Maria appeared behind her, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel, her expression softening the moment she saw him. She apologized for the mess, though there was none, and welcomed him in. It felt natural now, the way he stepped inside their home as if it were another part of his world, not an intrusion but a return. The apartment was warm from the oven, scented with cinnamon and baked apples. Lily tugged him toward the living room, insisting he sit on the couch so she could show him something she'd been working on. She returned moments later with a folder decorated with stickers, flowers, stars, crooked hearts. Inside were pages of drawings. Some were simple doodles. Some were attempts at people she saw every day. And on the final page was a drawing that made him pause completely. It showed Maria, Lily, and him standing together in front of a small house with a garden, all three holding hands. Above them Lily had written, in her uneven handwriting, "My safe place." He swallowed hard. "You drew this?" he asked, his voice warm but slightly unsteady. Lily nodded proudly. "It's us," she said matter-of-factly, as if that truth had always existed, waiting for him to catch up. Maria's cheeks turned pink, her eyes darting to the floor, and she mumbled something about children drawing whatever they imagine. But Evan slid the drawing back into its folder with a care that felt almost reverent. Later, while Lily played with her stuffed animals on the rug, Evan and Maria talked quietly in the kitchen. For the first time, she allowed herself to be open with him, really open. She admitted how terrified she'd been, how close she had come to losing everything, how helpless she felt watching her daughter carry a secret no child should have to bear. She confessed that some nights, when she thought Lily was asleep, she had cried out of fear that Lauren might discover the truth and punish them both. Evan listened, every word sinking into him like a weight he wished he could have lifted sooner. He apologized for not seeing what was happening under his own roof, but Maria shook her head, saying none of it was his fault, that people like Lauren fooled everyone, not just him. Then, with hesitation, she asked a question that had clearly been haunting her. "What will happen now, to your life? To your company?" Evan answered honestly. He told her things were stabilizing, that his team was strong, that the company would recover fully within months. But then he added something he had not planned to say, something that surprised even himself. "My life doesn't feel the same anymore," he murmured. "Not since all of this happened. Not since you and Lily came into it." Maria stared at him, startled, as if the meaning behind the words reached her only gradually. Before either of them could say more, Lily rushed into the kitchen, clutching her stuffed bunny. She announced that she was hungry and tugged insistently on Evan's hand, demanding he stay for dinner. Maria tried to intervene, embarrassed, but Evan smiled and assured her he would stay if she didn't mind. She didn't. In truth, she seemed relieved. Dinner was simple: roast chicken, warm bread, vegetables, and the scent of apple pie cooling by the window, but to Evan it felt like a feast. He hadn't sat at a table like this in years, with laughter filling the small space, with someone beside him instead of across a long, echoing dining hall. Lily chattered happily, telling him about school, about her favorite cartoons, about a new game she liked. Evan found himself laughing at things no adult would find funny, simply because she said them with such earnestness. After dinner, he helped wash dishes while Maria dried them. Lily hummed a song in the living room, arranging her toys in a careful circle. When the dishes were done, Evan gathered his jacket, preparing to leave, though part of him resisted the idea of stepping back into the cold, quiet mansion awaiting him. He walked to the door, and Lily followed closely. Before he could reach for the handle, she tugged on his sleeve. "Will you come back tomorrow?" she asked, her voice small but full of hope. He knelt down, meeting her eyes. "Do you want me to?" he asked softly. She nodded without hesitation. "You make Mommy less scared," she said. "And me too." Something in his chest tightened sharply. He brushed a hand gently over her hair, feeling the impossible tenderness that had become familiar whenever he looked at her. "Then yes," he said. "I'll come back." Maria stood nearby, silent but smiling faintly, the emotion in her eyes impossible to hide. Evan stepped out into the hallway, and as the door closed behind him, he realized something profound: the mansion no longer felt like home. The place where his heart rested, where he felt needed, useful, and alive, was inside the small apartment he had just left. And from that moment forward, he knew that whatever path his life took, it would not be a road he walked alone. Lily had given him truth when he needed it most. Maria had given him trust he didn't deserve but cherished deeply. And somehow, without planning it, he had found a family in the most unexpected place, a family he intended to protect and cherish for the rest of his life.